said hello to my little friend. Now that's a familiar phrase that works in a lot of places, but this is where it comes from. The 1983 film Scarface. I want to explain the cultural impact that it had, as it was one of the first times that an anti-hero really took off with the public the way this did. So by definition, an anti-hero is somebody that's the focal point, or at least just part of the story, that lacks conventional hero attributes. In more simpler terms, they essentially do whatever their personal morality or lack thereof allows. An easier way to sum up how they work is the ends justify the means. Think Rick Sanchez, think Walter White, watch my Bryan Cranston video. And you can even think of characters like Frank from Shameless and the gang from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Think of the characters that are terrible people, but you kind of catch yourself rooting for them, or at least feeling for them. So let's explore Scarface and Tony Montana and how we met him. So Scarface premiered on December 1st, 1983 and released 8 days later on the 9th. It was directed by Brian De Palma and it starred Al Pacino, Michelle Pfeiffer, and F. Murray Abraham, and introducing Stephen Bauer as Manolo. The screenplay was by Oliver Stone and it's an IP that belongs to Universal. It was actually based on the 1932 Howard Hughes movie, which itself is based on the novel by Armitage Trail. In this adaptation, they incorporated the 1980 Maria boat lift, where an estimated 125,266 Cubans had reached Florida. Despite many misconceptions, there is no one person that Tony Montana is based on, beyond the character from the original movie and an amalgamation of different criminals in the Miami drug trade. Naturally, this movie had quite a reaction at release. Martin Scorsese was noted as saying to Stephen Bauer, the actor that played Manolo, "You guys are great, but be prepared because they're going to hate it in Hollywood, because it's about them." The reaction to this movie among critics and media in general was pretty negative. A number of them said they walked out at the chainsaw scene. The main issue being all the profanity and violence in the movie. Side note, the word is actually said about 223 times during this movie. So while much of the story is in fact inspired by real events and facts, many felt it blatantly glorified drugs and violence to an obnoxious degree. Although it is worth mentioning, a lot of critics retroactively gave it its credit as a good gangster film. This movie really pushed the bar and challenged the rating system and what merits an R rating. Personally, I think they're just giving him a hard time. Remember when he looked out for Ernie?
You want a job, Ernie?
Sure, Tony.
Okay, then you call me tomorrow.
Hey, man, you got a job.
You see? A solid portion of the Cuban community was not happy with this movie. Some took issue with the way it seemed to glorify and portray the issues that were going on within the community. They were so vocal with their dislike, it caused a lot of issues with filming because of this. The entire story is based in Miami, but a lot of scenes were filmed in LA. Another issue that was cited was the fact that there were many non-Cuban actors playing Cuban characters, specifically the lead, Al Pacino, with some saying he overacted, hating his accent. On the other hand, it was actually well absorbed by the hip-hop community. I mean, where do I start? There's a rapper named Scarface.
Going to Scarface name, man, because that was me, man.
There's countless songs that have samples and sound bites from the movie.
Chichi, get the yayo.
It's quoted here and there by a few hip-hop artists. In fact, the actor that played Chi-Chi reprised his role in Big Pun's I'm Not a Player video. In my personal opinion, the rags to riches aspect is what really drew the hip-hop community in. The fact that you saw him go from the streets to the mansion, you could see why some couldn't help but find that inspiring, to some degree. Money by any means is an attitude that was always around, but Tony Montana became a real poster boy for that. I feel like it's fair to say that the hustle mentality that's huge in the culture was strongly influenced by this movie and character. Hip-hop's appreciation was showcased in an interview that was made in 2003 by Def Jam on the 20th anniversary of Scarface. It was a nice collection of artists, producers, actors, hip-hop heads in general that spoke on how influential and astonishing this movie was to them, with many of them feeling that Tony Montana embodied their hunger and will to get to the top and find success. The character Tony Montana absolutely had an influence on pop culture and on entertainment by far. When The Godfather came out, it changed how films were cast, which Scarface is a product of, as having Marlon Brando play Don Corleone had to happen before Al Pacino could play a part like Tony Montana. With that said, it widened the scope on what was pushing the envelope but could still get an R rating. And it also widened the scope on what an anti-hero could really be and how it could really be pushed. Something that was definitely taken from this movie was the fact that many gangster movies have some sort of epilogue or moral to its story, to showcase the results of the negative decisions that are made by the characters. Personally, I always kind of saw this as a way of justifying what's being shown by the movie, because then it at least shows you that this decision was ultimately a bad one, or ultimately a negative one. The art world definitely felt the influence of Tony Montana, as there are countless works of street art worldwide, and not to mention countless canvases and murals. It also influenced many stories in video games, none more prevalent than in Grand Theft Auto Vice City, where much of the story is inspired by the Scarface storyline. In fact, much of Tony's mansion is recreated and eventually owned by the player. Unfortunately, when telling these kind of stories, there's some inherent negatives that will come with it. Kids that lack role models will create their own versions in their heads and emulate things that they see, especially things that get results that they like. That said, a lot of young men can see an anti-hero in a higher regard than they really should. While granted, this movie didn't depict sales of illegal products in a positive light, but it most definitely planted the seed of the idea that it's an option to be done. It also really doesn't help when it's showing you a lavish lifestyle in such a glamorous fashion that can give a lot of people the wrong perspective of what a life of this kind of criminality actually looks like. This movie came out in the 1980s. This is during a time where media had a much stronger influence on the public at large. And granted, not every child that saw this decided to go and become a drug kingpin. It did offer a lot more negative things to walk away with than positive. I didn't mention this during the hip-hop segment. The release of this film coincided with the rise of hip-hop, and it feels very fair to say that because of that, it had such an influence. Here's some just cool facts about the movie. The screenwriter Oliver Stone got access to the FBI and DEA crime files for inspiration to add to authenticity. Notably, the chainsaw scene came from these files. Robert De Niro was considered for the role of Tony Montana, and John Travolta was considered for Manolo. Both almost got the part. When it was originally presented to the ratings board, it was given an X rating, but the director had showed it to law officials who testified it's an accurate depiction of the drug trade in Miami at the time. Due to the fact that it gave the public quote-unquote insider knowledge about organized crime, it was deemed educational. Who knew? The hotel where the chainsaw scene was filmed was gutted and turned into a CVS located on 728 Ocean Drive in South Beach, Miami. If you have a good eye, it'll immediately pop out to you. Believe it or not, there's a censored version of this movie, a made-for-TV version of this movie. It's actually very interesting to see how they censor it, and it's actually really funny.
Where'd you get that beauty scar, tough guy? Eating pineapple?
Sticking your head up your toilet. Okay, drop that. How's that?
For the 2006 video game Scarface, The World Is Yours, Al Pacino personally picked the voice actor Andre Sagliuzzo, sorry if I mispronounced your name, bro, to voice Tony Montana in the game, as his voice had changed too much to reprise it. I didn't really make a segment for this because it didn't really add anything. It felt like more of a fan story, if I'm being honest. But a quick summary, the game literally starts at the very end of the movie, but instead you get control over Tony. You have to immediately turn around and catch Sosa's dude before he catches you with the shotgun. The game is cool, I have no knocks for it besides it being kind of repetitive after a while, but even with that, it was a pretty awesome game. What made this stand the test of time? To be honest, there's no way to elaborate on this part without sounding like a fanboy, so I'll just give 3 mature reasons why I think it holds up. Number 1, Tony Montana. Tony's driving confidence was bigger than he ever was. And while we witness many evils he does, he has the ability to take control over a situation well over his head, and it's beyond astonishing. Sosa said it himself.
There is no lying in you.
And that's because he spoke with his whole chest and was ready for anything he had to do. I know I pointed out how dangerous this kind of character could be for an impressionable mind, but this is why. You find yourself rooting for Tony, not because he's a stand-up guy, but because he's winning against all odds. Number 2, the list of quotable lines in this movie is a healthy one. Seriously, this movie has at least one good quotable line every few scenes, or at the very least lines that will stick in your head after one viewing. I honestly cannot pick a favorite, but I'm gonna give you a few of my favorites, and these are:
The last time you're gonna see a bad guy like this again, let me tell you. Who do I trust? Me!
Howdy leg, huh?
The eyes, Chico. They never lie.
Dígame.
Where'd you get the beauty scar, tough guy? Eating
Another Quaalude, you're gonna love me again.
Hey, look at this pelican flying. Come on, pelican.
And finally, number 3. Initially, I had laughed when I first heard that it was deemed educational because it gives an inside look at the criminal world. But the more I think about it, it really does. The final scene with Elvira before she leaves and she's frustrated and she actually says to him,
"Hey, see what we're becoming to. We're losers. We're not winners.
we're not winners, Tony, we're losers." And it's thought-provoking because it shows that she's actually, this is the result of her reflecting after she's on the other side of all this wealth and riches, all these drugs. She realized it means nothing because they can't have a normal life. One of the few moments you actually see an insightful side of Tony when he goes off with his bad guy speech. What does that make you? Good? It's kind of weird to have a morality discussion with a guy like Tony Montana, but, well, that's neither here nor there. To be fair, these are all in my own head, and I know I could sound like I'm kind of reaching with these, but there's definitely lessons that could be taken. A huge one being that a fast life of criminality displayed on the screen has no substance really to offer. The phrase "the world is yours" is a recurring theme in this movie, showing up when Tony is officially a big player and at the very end once he loses it all. I always saw this as the movie's way of saying, the world is yours by all means, but what you give and put out into the world is what you'll get back. Some of my personal thoughts on this movie. For starters, I was about 10 when I first saw this movie. Obviously a terrible age to have seen this kind of movie, but I was a nosy kid and I had access to it. I say it's terrible that I saw it so young because it definitely desensitized me to violence in a way that impacted me negatively growing up. I think it's definitely fair to call this a dude movie, especially when I was growing up, but I never looked at it with any more positivity besides it being a cool movie. I didn't have any posters hung up on my wall. At most, I watched the movie a lot and I had the game when it came out in 2006. Also, and I got the special edition DVD. Still got it too. I never used the money clip. The most I had ever really took from this was, you get what you give or you reap what you sow. Tony Montana was the architect to his own destruction and all the chaos in his life, and it should serve as a reminder that a fast life will meet a fast end. Beyond that, this movie had a huge impact on my interest in film, specifically the chainsaw scene and how it was done. What changed how I looked at it was once I realized you don't actually really see anything beyond blood splatter, the chainsaw, the evil setup of the situation, and the pain on Tony's face. After that, it's all just your imagination that's going to town. Watch it with the sound off or play it with nice music. You'll still see and feel the gravity of the situation, but a lot of the intensity of the situation's gone. To wrap it up, there's a lot going on in this movie. There's definitely birthed the normalization of rooting for the bad guy and what tends to have impressionable minds, glorifying the wrong things and people. Not saying you can't enjoy and appreciate a character, but let's be clear, Tony Montana wasn't ever a quote-unquote good guy. He's an anti-hero at best. His hunger, his wit, his charisma, all those things made him likable and influential. But on that note, like, share, subscribe, check out all the links, add me on my social medias. Now say goodnight to the bad guy. I'm out of here.